Hey everyone. Uh, I guess it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. So I wanted to make a video about a lot of the different changes we've had to the theatrical exhibition news lately, because it's been a lot. And certainly a lot since the last time I made a comprehensive video that was just about movie news. So let's get into that. This past weekend, it was the first weekend of October. And as of October 2nd, which was the Friday, at 5 p.m., maybe they cut that a little bit, but 5 p.m., North Carolina, the state that I live in, entered Phase 3, which was the phase that movie theaters are allowed to reopen in this state. A couple other jurisdictions and places opened as well, so the last percentages I saw were that about 80% of the United States' indoor theaters are open, and there's still 20% closed, mainly in New York State, especially New York City, and the Los Angeles area, though they are starting to open up pockets around that. So we have about 80% of theaters in the U.S. raring to go at this point. And the theaters in North Carolina were allowed to open. Because obviously the last 3 movies I saw last month, they were all in South Carolina and Virginia because North Carolina was still closed, but they reopened. Now this is obviously exciting for me, the person who lives to go to the movies. And of course, I was not sure if theaters would open immediately once they got the go-ahead, because, you know, originally there was another date. It was supposed to open in mid-September, and then that was pushed back when the governor did like a phase 2.5 sort of in the middle. But they were, as soon as October 2nd happened, and there was only like a day or two notice that phase 3 was going ahead, the theaters were open, including the Alamo Drafthouse in Raleigh, the theater that I prefer to visit. As far as Alamo-specific stuff, and the North Carolina stuff I understand is not going to appeal to or be interesting to everybody, so let me get that out of the way first, and then I'll go into the major more news. The Alamo Drafthouse here reopened, and it's only showing 3 movies. It's showing Tenet, which is taking up the vast majority of the screens, and then it was also showing The Empire Strikes Back, which Disney has re-released for like a 40th anniversary thing, so it's a full-on re-release, not just loaning out the library titles to little theaters here and there, like some of the other legacy movies that are coming out. And then Hocus Pocus, the Halloween movie that has somehow become a classic despite the fact that it's not very good. I know, that's like blasphemy now. People love that movie. I went to see it in the theater when I was a kid in elementary school. I kind of liked it okay then. I really don't think that movie holds up. I remember a couple of years ago there was an article, I forget if it was Vox or another website, that said Hocus Pocus is a garbage movie not worthy of your nostalgia. That's probably a bit too harsh, but I definitely agree with the sentiment. I'm not a Hocus Pocus fan. But regardless of that, Hocus Pocus was also re-released in theaters, and I'm recording this on Sunday afternoon, and apparently it's the number 2 movie at the box office this weekend behind Tenet, so I guess people still like Hocus Pocus. I mean, there's certainly a lot of stuff at Spirit Halloween for it. So they only had those 3 movies. I did see a listing for Goonies that seemed to have disappeared, or maybe they took it down, and I've seen they did a showing of Lost Boys today, I think, and they're doing a couple more throughout the month. But still, not that many, and that's probably because the Alamo Drafthouse here, the theaters are pretty small. They have like smaller theaters that sit, or auditoriums, that fit about 50 people, and I only know this from when I had rented out one of the theaters for the wedding that's not happening on Halloween because of COVID. But there's the 50 seats, and then they have the bigger theaters that are about double that. They can sit about 90 to 100 people. But they only have 11 auditoriums there, so it's not as big as some of the other multiplexes. The movie theater that I was a manager of for a while that had 14 screens is another Regal Theater in the town I live in that has 20 screens, so obviously 11 is not that many. And with the restricted capacity, North Carolina currently has a 30% capacity limit. Can't not fit that many people, so a lot of the showings were sold out. That's also why I did not go back to the Alamo this weekend, because I've already seen Tenet, and they didn't have a 35mm screening of it. It was just the normal digital presentation. If they had had a 35 screening, I probably would have bought tickets super in advance to avoid it being sold out. And I don't like Hocus Pocus, and I kind of considered maybe seeing Empire Strikes Back, decided not to. Maybe next weekend they'll have Possessor, because that's being released by Neon, which is partially owned by Alamo Drafthouse, or at least Tim League or whomever. So I'm hoping that maybe they'll have that, and I'll just have to keep refreshing my app. But the bad news about Alamo being reopened is that Alamo Season Pass, their subscription service, is still staying paused, even if you had wanted to turn it back on. So the tickets are still going to be full price for people like me who have the season pass. They said they're hoping to restart it in 2021, and I understand that. They've just reopened. They're probably desperate for revenue. They can't have someone just paying $20 a month and then like $1 change for each ticket. That's not going to be enough for their revenue to sustain themselves. And that's sort of the problem that movie theaters are going into right now. As far as other theaters in the area, I don't want to say I live within walking distance because it's a little farther than that for most people, but I live very, very close to an AMC theater that is still closed. It did not reopen this weekend, but that 20-screen Regal Theater did open, and it has Tenet and New Mutants and Unhinged and the other new movies, as well as some legacy stuff. I think they had Magic Mike for some reason, and Back to the Future. Some of the classic films that are doing well with the legacy screenings and have been at drive-ins and stuff since COVID. So, but speaking of Regal, the big news that came out actually late last night when I was watching a movie, Cineworld, which owns Regal, is going to shutter temporarily, not going out of business or anything, but they're going to shutter all of their theaters in the US and the UK for the time being. And that's basically because the movie release schedule has had an atomic bomb blast across it. It started a couple weeks ago when Disney made a couple changes to their lineup. They pushed back the Murder on the Orient Express sequel, which is Fox, because Disney obviously bought out Fox. They pushed that back to next year. They pushed back Black Widow. So now it's going to be like 2 years since the last Marvel movie, because they pushed that way back to May of next year. And so there's not much on the release slate right now. Aside from some smaller independent stuff and a couple like weird one-off movies like that Robert De Niro War and Grandpa one that I can't watch YouTube without seeing the ad for. It's like Biden ads, Trump ads, War and Grandpa. Those are like the three major ads I'm seeing on YouTube right now. That's coming out stuff. I guess the next not big movie, but the next movie that as a new release that I was interested in seeing, unless Possessor gets played at my Alamo, is Freaky, the Vince Vaughn, Blumhouse, Freaky Friday, vice versa, body swap serial killer slasher movie. That looks pretty funny. I mean, I actually looked at Vince Vaughn's filmography. I have not liked a movie Vince Vaughn has made since Wedding Crashers, which came out in 2005, so that's a little, Like, even though there's a Hulu original film called The Binge, which is sort of like The Purge, but with drugs instead of violence, and it's a comedy that's not funny, and it's a really awful movie. I watched it because I was interested in the premise, and it sucks, but Vince Vaughn is in it. I know he's done some other like independent action movies and stuff lately because he's one of those right-wing actors who gets hired by like right-wing companies, kind of like Mel Gibson is nowadays. So he hasn't been doing a lot of mainstream stuff lately. But it's been a long time since I've liked a Vince Vaughn movie. But I was looking forward to that. That's set to come out on Friday, November 13th. But not much else is going on there because after Disney did the whole Mulan thing, and by the way, the analytics company that estimated how much money Mulan made, originally Yahoo reported that it was like $200 million or something. Then the analytics firm who reported the stuff to them was like, you're misinterpreting the numbers. It's probably closer to like 60 to 90 million. So it does not appear, with how that film underperformed in China and everything, it seems like the Mulan premium VOD experiment didn't work out. And maybe $30 was too much. Maybe the idea that it was going to be free on Disney Plus in 3 months anyway did it. I don't know. Maybe it was the mediocre reviews or the fact that they filmed in areas of China with concentration camps. A lot of stuff was going against that movie, so maybe, it's hard to say it was specifically that experimental release model that Disney was doing with it that made it fail, but ultimately it didn't do very well. So I think Disney has decided, no, we have to stick with theatrical exhibition. For now, I guess. And they did push New Mutants out as a sacrificial lamb, obviously, but, it didn't do very well. So, they tried the Mulan thing. After that didn't work, it looks like they decided to just kind of rejigger their entire release schedule. So Black Widow got pushed back. They left Pixar's Soul to open around Thanksgiving, which was very interesting because if there's one film genre that we knew has been successful on PVOD, it's been these kids movies, because we had Trolls World Tour, which was the first one of these movies to go with this like $20 premium VOD experiment, and it was successful for Universal. And then Warner Brothers followed that out with Scoob. I don't believe I looked at the numbers to see how successful Scoob was, but it seemed like it did fairly well for Warner Brothers there. I think it was Warner Brothers. But and then Disney had dropped Onward to Disney Plus after the theaters closed. It had only been playing for like 2-3 weeks or so, and then they just kicked it there to just watch with a subscription. So people were thinking that maybe they would do maybe just a lower price point, but they'd put Soul onto Disney Plus, since the kids' movies, the family movies, seem to do well at that price point. But they're sticking with theatrical as for now. I mean, that might change. But probably the biggest death knell since the Mulan and the Black Widow stuff is that Sony, MGM, whoever's releasing the new Bond, Universal actually is, Universal MGM, they decided to push back Bond to April of next year. Now remember, I believe the first movie that changed its release date before even the theaters started closing for COVID was No Time to Die, the James Bond film. It was originally set to open this past April, and they pushed it back to November, and now they've pushed it back to next April again, so a full year from its original planned release date. But with that moving, as far as big blockbuster IP movies that might draw people back to the movie theater, now it's Christmas. There's nothing left till Christmas. And even then, Christmas, we have 2 Warner Brothers films. We have Dune. The widespread appeal of Dune remains to be seen. There's a very rabid fan base for that book who's very excited about that movie, and I'm excited about that movie. I like the David Lynch version. And that's saying something. But it could be like a Blade Runner 2049 thing, where people like me absolutely love the movie, but nobody goes to see it. And then Wonder Woman. And obviously the DC movies are touch and go. Some people like them. A lot of people like the original Wonder Woman. I hated it. But those are your only 2 movies for Christmas right now. I mean, in between Soul and you have like the new Croods movie and and some other stuff. But really, you got these 2 movies that are supposed to come out at Christmas, because Spielberg's West Side Story got pushed back a year. That was a Fox acquisition from Disney. Obviously, Top Gun had already been pushed back. A lot of other stuff had been pushed back. So, by and large, the movie release schedule for the rest of this year, you might as well just forget about it. I mean, it remains to be seen if even what's still left on there in the barren wasteland of 2021 release dates is even going to stay there. And it's not like, New Year's happens and we flip over to 2021 and then magically COVID goes away. So how long this is going to stretch on, we might start seeing first quarter releases get pushed back. I mean, even stuff like Ghostbusters Afterlife, which is set for March right now, might get pushed back. I mean, at this point, it's really bad. I mean, the movie theater industry is really in trouble, and short of a government bailout or a studio taking a chance to something that will bring people in. Because, alright, Warner Brothers bit the bullet, and they put out Tenet. But Tenet isn't based on an IP, unless Christopher Nolan himself is the IP, and that's what they were going with. But Tenet was probably not the movie to open this up with. You could argue Black Widow, but Black Widow is also a prequel that takes place before Endgame. So how much that expands the MCU storyline to get people into the theater and excited for it remains to be seen. And then the next 2 Marvel movies after that are completely new, untested IP. You got Eternals and you got the Shang-Chi. And not since maybe when the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie came out has Marvel been in this precarious position where they're risking something on a name that isn't household yet. I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy was the space opera, and it wasn't very mainstream popularity of a comic book, but the movie came out, it was a huge hit, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief. And since then, no other movie that Marvel's put out has really been that much of a risk where people were like, I'm not sure if this is going to catch on. But until Doctor Strange 2, which is the next Marvel sequel that is further on, there's no other Marvel theatrical movie that is quote-unquote safe. And after Endgame, which definitely felt like an ending to that Marvel Cinematic Universe as it is, I'm not sure that the next new stuff is going to have as much of an appetite, so I think that's why Disney's also pushing back, because they really don't want any chinks in the armor of this cash cow, because this is probably the most precarious the MCU has been since the first Guardians of the Galaxy, when people were not sure if that was going to be big or not, and now everything has been a guaranteed hit to one degree or another, and now they're in this phase 4, which is probably the most unsure they've been. And that's probably why you're seeing like the WandaVision trailer come out and Disney trying to push its more safe Disney Plus Marvel shows with the legacy characters, because they need that to boost up enthusiasm for the theatrical films at this point. So yeah, Black Widow probably wasn't also going to be the movie to be that first one. James Bond had a possibility. Now, James Bond films do better internationally than they do domestically, and I believe Spectre underperformed, but they're always still big hits. But it's an IP, it's still a big blockbuster. But, and I was talking to my friend Andrew about this, I think if there was one big movie that is already like locked in the can, ready to go, that should have probably been pushed to reopen movies that would really bring in the demographics, as much as I hate these movies, it probably should have been Fast and Furious 9. That is a franchise that has super wide appeal, that doesn't seem to be slowing down in popularity or sentiment. Even that Hobbs and Shaw thing made money. It does well both domestic and internationally. International got the last couple ones in 3D when domestic didn't. It has a huge demographic reach as far as the diversity of audiences that enjoy it. It's not just white; it's also Black, Latino, men, women. It's multi-quadrant, more than 4-quadrant. I mean, it has this broad appeal that still is not going away yet. Quality of the movies aside, I'm not a fan, but everyone else in the world is. So that probably would have been the movie to push out there to reopen theaters. That would have, at that point, we'd know if people were staying away for product or fear. Because that's the big question mark we have right now, is why, now that the movie theaters are open in 80% of the country, why aren't people going? And it's either because of the product, because they're just not interested in Tenet, or they're not interested enough in Tenet in the current environment. If COVID never happened, the interest may have been different. But, when you have Unhinged and New Mutants and Tenet, and you have a couple other things like Broken Hearts Club Gallery and Infidel and some other shit, but it's either the product keeping people away. It's like, maybe I would be willing to go back to the movies, but since there is more of a risk than was before, is Tenet worth the risk? Or it's just fear in general, where no movie at this point would ever convince somebody to go back. And I think it's different for different people. Like when I look at what my Alamo is doing this weekend, every single show for every single movie was sold out yesterday, Saturday. But that's also with these smaller theaters, 30% capacity restrictions and all of that, and the number of auditoriums. It's a lot easier to get a ticket for a movie at the Regal with the 20 screens that's open, or any of the other non-Alamo theaters in the area that are open. Because not every theater is open, even though they have the ability to open this weekend. And you can also say that the people who choose to go to Alamo here are the people who are a bit more hardcore about going to the movies than the average moviegoer. You can probably guess that from it. So people aren't going back, and that's very evident when you look at, like, if you just wanted to go on Fandango and wanted to look at the seat selection just to see what was available. Aside from the seats that are blocked off for capacity restrictions, a lot of seats are open for pretty much every movie you want to see. And so some other theaters are doing, aside from the subscription thing, which Alamo isn't doing again until 2021, and I don't actually know if AMC, A-List, and the Regal subscription plan were following the same thing or not. I mean, if Regal's shutting down entirely, then obviously they're not doing it. I don't know if AMC has reactivated theirs or not, though. But with that, it's rough. I mean, even the Alamo, it's not opening every day running a normal show schedule. It looks like they're only open Thursday nights through maybe Monday afternoon. They're still going to be closed for the bulk of the week, so they're only really opening for weekends. Because, I mean, why open for the days that are generally slower for business anyway, when business, even on your peak hours, is still super slow comparatively? And so some other theaters, I mean, they might not shut down completely like Regal will, but they're running 2 sets a day instead of 4 or 5, or they're only going to stay open on weekends. I mean, they have to do something so that, they're not in a worse position than if they just stayed closed. Because if you're spending more money to open and operate than you'd lose just by staying closed and not operating at all, because you don't have labor and product and all that stuff costs, then you're going to close. So Regal's obviously making that decision, especially because if there's really no fresh product till December at the earliest, and maybe you got Pixar sticking to November or not, then, the entire month of October is catalog titles and Tenet. Half to most of November is catalog titles and Tenet. I mean, there's no reason to stay. At some point, you are going to maximize the number of people in your geographic location who are interested and are willing to see Tenet. At some point, they're all going to have seen Tenet. And the people who want to see it twice, or more than once at the very least, they've probably already done it at this point. The movie's been out for a month in most places. Now, granted, the places that just reopened, and I do feel bad for the Regal Theaters that just reopened this past weekend, because if Regal closes down as early as next week, then they ramped up just to open for one weekend and shut down again. So that's going to be a lot of layoffs. There's going to be a lot of furloughs. It's a bad situation to be in for those Regal employees. I feel really bad. Because I still know people who work for Regal. I was one of them years ago. It's rough. At the same time, you could definitely not pay me enough to work at a theater at this time, because I know those customers are going to be the worst. The ones who are actually coming in. I don't know. So either studios are going to have to see that what Tenet did and think they have a product that will do better and bring people in to save the exhibition industry, or they're going to sit on everything and I don't know what they're waiting for. I guess they're hoping that someone else bites the bullet and not them. So they're hoping, maybe it's, Disney with Pixar and Soul. Maybe Soul does money that Tenet didn't do, and then studios will feel safe to push up their releases again. Or maybe they're waiting for the 2-punch of Warner Brothers, which is the distributor behind both Dune and Wonder Woman. And maybe they're just waiting for them to do it, or maybe they're going to hold off everything and hope a vaccine comes in. I don't really know what they're doing. I think they're just scared. And so anything that the studios are willing to put on PVOD, they're doing. And that's worked out for some movies. I read an article that Bill and Ted Face the Music. It's done okay in theaters. A lot of theaters wouldn't play it because it was day and date PVOD to theatrical, but it still was in over 1,000 screens or so at its widest area of release. But it did gangbusters on PVOD compared to its budget. So it worked for that movie. It worked for Trolls World Tour. We don't have hard data on some of the other movies that have skipped. There was Jon Stewart's movie that got mediocre reviews. Antebellum was recently dumped on there. That got sort of middling reviews as well. King of Staten Island, which I don't think anyone's actually seen. I was looking forward to that movie, and then they dumped it PVOD, and you didn't hear anything about it again. And there's been a handful of other movies that studios have just dumped to PVOD, or they've sold them off to a streaming service, or they're just releasing them. Just this past weekend, they announced that they're releasing the new adaptation of The Witches on HBO Max this month. The trailer looks like a CGI garbage fest. It doesn't look nearly as good as the original film adaptation with Angelica Houston, where they used actual prosthetic makeup and stuff, but such is modern movie making, where people rely on CGI, especially because that's Robert Zemeckis, and he's Polar Express guy and Beowulf guy, which is a worse movie. His Christmas Carol isn't that bad for that style, but regardless, you're seeing that happening. People are just selling things off to Netflix or their own individual streaming service if it's a studio. And, that's bringing in a little bit of revenue to keep their investors happy, but right now, everyone's just hanging on bated breath to figure out either A, a studio is going to risk putting a product out and it's going to bring in more people than Tenet did, or they're waiting for the vast majority of human beings to be okay with sitting in a movie theater again, because they're not right now. And regardless of whether that feeling is valid or not, if they don't feel that way, they don't feel that way. And I don't know. So I'll make more videos as we get more news, but right now it's looking pretty grim. If something does show at Alamo, I really want to go back to Alamo, because obviously I haven't been there since November, or March 14th, rather. I haven't been there since March 14th of this year. So I'd like to go back there. I'd like to, buy some merch from their lobby. I'd like to see their pre-shows again. I want to do that, but they have to put something there that I haven't already seen or that I'm interested in seeing. And there's plenty of, it's October. There's got to be plenty of horror catalog titles they can throw up that I'd want to see there. But, Lost Boys I've seen a million times. Hocus Pocus I don't like. That's, I'm hoping they'll show Possessor. Fingers crossed, and then I can buy my tickets early and go see Possessor, because I really do want to see that film. Or A24 is releasing Saint Maud in the UK at the very least. Maybe they'll throw it on American screens too. Who knows? But I'll keep you updated, and if they do show a movie that I want to see, I'll probably make a little quick video about that as well. But otherwise, we're in the midst of spooky season. It's October, so everyone try to have a good month.